What's going on, everybody? Anthony Servino here with the Face Off Sports Network with my top starts and sits at the running back position for NFL Week 8. But before we get into the action, let's recap last week. And it was a so-so week. Not good enough for me, which means it shouldn't be good enough for you. Brian Robinson start. It was a hit, 13.1 PPR points. Chuba Hubbard barely gets over my 10 PPR point threshold for skill position players, 11.2 PPR points. My other start that we missed on, Tony Pollard, who was in a smash spot against the Buffalo Bills. He got going a little bit early. He did suffer a brief injury, but that doesn't matter. Only 8.5 PPR points. This was a terrific spot. The Titans are so dependent on Tony Pollard, but he did not get the job done against Buffalo. And a lot of it, the quarterback position, there's no reason for an enemy defensive coordinator to really game plan against Will Levis or Mason Rudolph. And it showed a good defense, a good defensive coordinator like what they have in Buffalo will find a way to limit your best weapon. And they did, in fact, take out Tony Pollard. Let's go to my sits. And this is where it got bad. Zach Moss, good sit, and we should continue to sit him. He only had 7 PPR points last week, but it blew up on my face with James Conner and Kareem Hunt. Conner went for 17.2. Kareem Hunt went off against the 49ers, something I really didn't see coming, for 22.3. And, until further notice, we got to keep Kareem Hunt in our starting fantasy lineups, because if he could do that type of damage against a team like San Francisco on the road, then he's a locked and loaded starter moving forward. Now, let's recuperate. Let's get into the action. Let's get into my starts for this week. And the first running back, we are starting DeAndre Swift coming off the bye. We know what this guy has been doing after a bad start. DeAndre Swift, since week 4, 3 games, over 20 PPR points. Coming out of the bye, he's fresh, and he gets Washington. Now, Washington, their defense is slowly getting better. They're now middle of the pack against enemy running backs, but that's okay. The way DeAndre Swift is playing right now, I feel comfortable starting him against a Washington defense. Again, they're getting better. They limited Chuba Hubbard last week. They limited Jerome Ford 2 weeks ago. But if you look at the better offenses, the better running backs they played, they've been abused a little bit by running backs. Guys like Derrick Henry, James Conner, Zach Moss, got going on this football team. And even to a lesser extent, guys like Rachaad White and Devin Singletary popped a little bit earlier this year. So there's production to be had against this Washington Commanders defense. Now, when it comes to DeAndre Swift, we know he's losing some touches to Rashawn Johnson, but this is really Swift's backfield. He's getting 18.3 touches per game. He is averaging, when he's being involved in the passing game, 11.6 yards after the catch. He has an 82.6% catch rate when he is targeted. And he is also getting 12.4% of the team targets. So he is involved as a receiver and as a runner. When it comes to his overall usage the past 3 games, he is well over 20 touches in all 3. He has scored a touchdown in all 3 and has now received at least 4 targets in 4 out of 6 games played this year. I'm in on DeAndre Swift this week. Let's go to my next start. I'm going back to James Conner. I told you to sit him last week. That was a mistake. Listen, the Chargers, they're pretty good against the run, but James Conner overcame it. He bounced back after 2 mediocre outings. In week 5 against Frisco, 12 PPR points. In week 6 against Green Bay, 8.6. So it was nice to see him bounce back, even though I told you to sit him. But at least it shows he's going to start building some momentum. He has a really nice matchup this week against the Miami Dolphins. This is projected to be a high-scoring game. I believe at FanDuel right now, 46.5-point total. We're expecting Tua back. We know that both offenses, when they're clicking, they can put up points. Right now, Kyler's not playing good football when it comes to throwing the football. He is running. And when he is running at the rate he is, it does open up the rushing lanes as well for James Conner. Miami this year, they've been defending the pass pretty well. They've been gashed by enemy running backs. Guys like Charbonnet, Pollard, even Rhamondre Stevenson has gotten going. Goodson last week, right? If this was Jonathan Taylor, maybe Taylor goes off for 100 yards and a touchdown. But even Goodson managed 51 yards and a touchdown against this defense. This is a really, really nice spot for James Conner to pop maybe over 20 fantasy points for the first time this year. The closest he's come was 19 in week 2 against the Rams, 18 in week 4 against Washington. Conner, this is another guy getting volume, 17.6 touches per game. He has a 30.3% broken tackle rate, which is 98th percentile, using the tools and metrics at rotowire.com. He is averaging 12.1 yards after the catch, so he's effective as a receiver, and he's being targeted at 21.3% of routes he is running. When the volume's there, the production is there. Last week against the Chargers, he didn't score, but he took 21 touches for 152 total yards. 9 targets in the past 2 games. I think a lot of it has to do with Kyler's not pushing the ball downfield, so they're using James Conner more as a receiver, which raises his PPR point floor. Let's go to my final start. That's Kareem Hunt. Going back to Kareem Hunt now after I told you to sit him. I can't tell you to sit this guy anymore. I don't care about the age. Neither do the Kansas City Chiefs, and neither does Kareem Hunt with what he's given us. Back-to-back games since his week 4 return. 18.7 against the Saints, 22.3 against the 49ers. He has now scored 3 total touchdowns in his past 2 games. He has now received 24 touch in his past 2 games at least. In fact, since he's been back, he's averaging 22.7 touches per game. 58.1% of the snaps he's on a field, he is getting a touch. He has an 83.3% catch rate, not getting a ton of targets. But when he's getting targeted, he is catching the football and giving us positive yardage. What's helping Kareem Hunt is the fact that he is scoring a touchdown. And what's helping him score touchdowns is the fact that in the past 2 games, he has had 11 red zone carries, 5 of which inside the 5-yard line. I expect that to continue this week against the Las Vegas Raiders. This is a really nice matchup on paper. Vegas pretty good against the pass. You can certainly run on them. 4 different running backs have gone over 19.6 PPR points against this football team, including last week. Kyren Williams had a nice game, 21 for 76 and a pair of touchdowns on the ground. I am looking at another smash spot for Kareem Hunt, and depending on what his anytime touchdown score odds are, because they might be juiced, I'm certainly smashing that or using that in a parlay piece. Remember, if you like videos like this, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and the notification icon so you can be notified anytime we are live to answer your questions, which we do almost every day, or when we drop content just like this. If you have start-sit questions, ask them in the comment section below. We'll be happy to answer you as soon as we can. Now to my sits. We're going to start with Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard had one of his worst games of the year, and he hasn't had many. Last week against the Buffalo Bills, he did still have 18 touches, but only took them for 45 scoreless yards. He had 6 targets, but only caught 2 for 4 yards. That's what hurt his floor last week. He was not converting on those receptions, and when you're not catching the ball and taking it for positive yardage and you're not scoring, you're going to have a pretty mediocre day in fantasy football. The touches are still there, 18.7 touches per game. The targets are there. He is running particularly well. He is averaging 2.9 yards after the contact. So what's the issue? Why am I sitting him this week when he's been pretty damn good? Well, you get the Detroit Lions. And Detroit, they're number 2 on paper against enemy running backs. You can't throw the ball, Will Levis. You're not throwing the ball with Mason Rudolph. You just traded away DeAndre Hopkins. There's not a lot here right? Like, this is, unless Tony Pollard just turns into Barry Sanders and takes over this football game, the Lions are going to stack the box and absolutely minimize the damage of what Tony Pollard can do. And I see Tony Pollard as a touchdown dependent flex option at best this week. Let's go to my next sit, Ram Stevenson. And Ram Stevenson, he's either going to be really good in your fantasy lineup or he's going to be really bad. We've seen 3 really good days, over 17 PPR points. We've seen a mediocre day, just over 10, and we've seen 2 bad days under 4.5. Well, last week, in a really nice spot against Jacksonville in London, under 4.5 PPR points, played 27 offensive snaps, 9 touches, which was his second lowest total of the season. He only managed barely 25 yards total. No red zone carries, no red zone targets. In fact, it was JaMycal Hasty who had the more productive fantasy day and the only touchdown scored by a New England running back. When Ram isn't scoring and he's not getting touches, he's not even getting enough targets to give us anything. It is really hard to put him in our fantasy lineups. And this week he gets the Jets. This is an angry Jets team. They were embarrassed on national TV by the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I think this defense is to come out firing against New England. I don't think they want to get embarrassed by Drake May and a Patriots offense that realistically should have more difficulty moving the football. I like Drake May. I like some of these pieces, but like I said about Tony Pollard, I'm viewing Rhamondre Stevenson as a touchdown needy asset in week 8. Let's go to my final sit. And my final sit is going to be Alexander Mattison. Now, the positives about Alexander Mattison, even with Zamir White returning to the lineup, Alexander Mattison still dominated the backfield touches. In fact, he had a nice game last week, 15.3 PPR points. He had 26 touches, over 100 total yards. Did not score. Now, the reason why we're sitting Alexander Mattison, because he's getting the touches, he's producing. Well, you're getting the Kansas City Chiefs. And like I just said about Tony Pollard, I'm going to use the same narrative about Alexander Mattison. You can get all the touches in the world. There is no semblance of a passing attack. You just traded away Devontae Adams. You're back to Gardner Minshew. And now you get Kansas City coming in town. They're one of the best, if not the best defense in football. In fact, against enemy running backs, they are number 1. You can give Alexander Mattison 25 touches again. I don't know if he's getting 92 yards on the ground and 31 yards receiving. I think what is going to have to save Madison's day is if he scores or if he catches 5 balls for 30 yards. He was really efficient last week against the Rams. I don't see that efficiency happening again against the Chiefs. This could be an ugly game, and I do like the role Alexander Mattison has gained, and he has taken over this backfield. I just don't trust him. And I know volume is key, and I normally chase volume. I am not chasing volume against the number 1 defense against fantasy running backs, and really possibly the number 1 defense overall in the NFL. We are sitting Alexander Mattison in week 8.